I wanted to ask you about practice. So, it seems that these kinds of cultural transitions, there's often something in the zeitgeist that kind of pushes people to move to the next stage. Um, but given all the trouble we're experiencing in the world with these super intelligent technologies, like, it could go terribly wrong or terribly right. And with climate change, likewise, it could go terribly wrong, or maybe we'll be able to survive through it fine. So, with granted all of these challenges, what kind of practices do you think are the most useful to help ferry people over from first tier to second tier?
Right. Well, let me just give some actual types of practice that an individual can do right now. And I'll give some from that can help with growing up and some that can help with waking up. And then I'll very, very briefly talk about cleaning up, because it's a really important area that most people need a lot of work on. And I'll go ahead and start with cleaning up. Cleaning up is also an area that really was only discovered about 100 years ago. So it's still much too recent to be included in any of the world's great spiritual systems. So it's just another area of integral that we have to add to any sort of practice of waking up in order to cover all the bases, because we keep learning things on a daily basis. Cleaning up has to do with what's generally called shadow material, or just unconscious repressed material. And of course, we often associate that particular practice with the name Sigmund Freud. And Freud's inner circle, when he started, included Carl Jung and Alfred Adler and Otto Rank. And it really was a fairly major sort of discovery on the part of humans. And Freud only wrote his first book in 1895. So again, it's only about 100 years ago that this happened. But one of the things that we found out is that people can actually take aspects of their own awareness, their own mind, their own psyche, and they can judge them harshly and shove them out of awareness. And when you do that, they become unconscious. They become part of your shadow material. And very, very few people escape childhood without some sort of significant shadow material. And we find this in world leaders. We find it, people will often take up a spiritual practice because they have shadow material that's just driving them in really insane ways. And one of the most common things that happens, one of the most common defense mechanisms, is you have some element of you that for whatever reason you really don't like. And it could be because your parents didn't like it, or your peers didn't like it, or you just decided that you thought that was a horrible thing to have. And so instead of working on it, you just denied it, you just disowned it. So let's say you're really over controlling, and that's just a trait that you have. And you sort of shove that out, and that really hyper controlling aspect of you becomes a part of your shadow. And then one of the most common things people do with shadow elements is they project them onto other people. So you're sitting there and you know that somebody is feeling really controlling right now, but it's not you. So it must be your boss. So you project that controlling element of yourself onto your boss. Now, your boss might already be fairly controlling, but now he's got two control elements. He's got his and he's got yours. So now he appears like this massively controlling, like he's looking over your shoulder all the time. You start getting reactive. Maybe you snap back at him, and you're sort of headed along a path where you're very likely going to get fired if you keep something like that up. People do this all the time. If they have a particular drive that they want to really complete a particular task, like a man is out raking the yard or something like that, and he's really getting tired of it. And so he's starting to lose track of his own desire to get this done. And his wife sticks her head out the door and says, finish those leaves. And he explodes at her because he thinks she's now just pushing him. She's the one that's forcing him to clean the leaves up, and he just explodes at her and yells. Or you can have a sexual impulse, the ones that Freud examined, sex and aggression. So you can have a sexual impulse from somebody, push that out, and then think they're trying to hit on you all the time. You can push anger out of your awareness, think the entire world is mad at you. You'll often then get clinically depressed if something like that happens. So all of these are, you're getting these symptoms that seem real and just caused by themselves, but they're really caused by your shadow material. And one of the most difficult things as people learn about shadow material is it does tend to mean that those things that you really react to in the environment, that you really hate, really can't stand, those are in many, many cases, at least in some degree, that's your own shadow elements. It means you have to admit that, no, wait, you're that person that has all that anger, or you're that person that has all that pride, or you're the person that's over controlling. And it's a very humbling, in some ways quite difficult practice to do. But it also is the source of most of the kind of interpersonal problems that you're having. And so if you were to go to a therapist or something like that, you would end up working on something like that. So one of the things that you can do to help with this whole process that we call cleaning up or reintegrating your shadow elements is simply looking for the people or the things that really, really move you hugely. And it can be, by the way, in a positive or negative way. People can and often do project their positive qualities. And then they end up making heroes out of people, or just admiring them all off the wall. And they just, oh, you're so great, you're wonderful. And they just lost track of a little bit of their own greatness, their own specialness. People do that all the time and end up projecting that onto other people. So they take a first person impulse or quality, they shove it out of awareness into a second person, a you or they or them. And then if that's not enough, they'll shove it all the way into a third person. Oh, it just belongs to him or her, all of them. They're all angry at me for, I don't know why. And so the cleaning up process is reversing that. You take, let's say you have a dream and you're projecting your anger and it's showing up in the dream as a monster who's trying to eat you. And you're having this recurring dream and you wake up, it's a nightmare, and you wake up almost every night with this horrible dream. So if that's some of your real shadow material, then you want to just reverse the steps that created it. And since it was created by going from first person to second person into third person, now it's just showing up as a monster in your dreams. Then reversing that means take it from a third person, make it a second person, and then make that first person. So in this case, and you often just use what Gestalt therapy calls an empty chair. So you just sit down and you have an empty chair in front of you and you put the monster in that chair. So you're taking that third person monster and you're making them a second person sitting right in the chair across from you. And you start talking to it. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? And you ask it a question and then you play the monster and answer. And then you go back, ask it another question, then play the monster and answer. And after doing that, until you actually start to feel like, okay, I'm the monster answering, then you make it first person. You actually identify with that monster. One of the things you'll find out as you ask, what are you doing, monster? Why are you here? What are you doing? The monster will say things like, I want to eat you, I want to rip you up, I hate your guts, I'm angry at you. So it's got this enormous amount of anger and aggression. It's aimed at you. And that's why you don't feel aggression. You just feel fear, because that's what the shadow is leading you. And so as you've been going back and you've been identifying with that monster, you start to get in touch with that anger that you weren't allowing yourself to get in touch with. So you're re-owning it, you're taking it back. And then when you finally make it first person, you've re-owned it. And if that was the cause of the monster showing up, the monster will stop showing up in your dreams. And the same if you projected some of your greatness or your ability onto somebody else, and you put them in the empty chair, start talking back and forth, start identifying with them, and then re-own that quality, then you'll get in touch again with that part of you that's very, very special, and that you've just lost track of and projected. That turns out to be a really enormous part of people's lives. They project either positives or negatives onto others. And it's particularly common, of course, in relationships. And many relationships that don't have access to some sort of actual practice of cleaning up or some sort of therapeutic practice, those relationships work only if the shadow elements of both people match up well. So if one person projects their controlling nature onto their partner, and then the partner projects their greatness onto their partner, then they'll just go back, oh, you're wonderful, oh, you do it, therefore do whatever I say. So the person will do whatever they say, then, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, and they just fit, and they just love it. And they never have to confront their shadows, and things go just wonderfully from that time on. But this has been a new addition to human knowledge. Again, only about 100 years old. That was right about the same time that James Mark Baldwin was discovering these stages of growing up. And by the way, Baldwin was a colleague with William James. And they're often, if you say, who is America's greatest psychologist, these two often, it's one or the other of them. But they were friends. And while Baldwin was discovering growing up, William James was writing a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. He was studying waking up experiences, his first person experiences of metamorphosis or satori or spiritual experiences. And that's what he was doing. So this is some really incredibly important periods in human discovery about aspects of themselves that they really had no idea was there before. And so when you get to waking up, so practices you can do for cleaning up, and just look for those people or things around you that especially charge you up, either positively or negatively. And then think about a little 3, 2, 1, re-owning some of those shadow elements. For waking up, there are two main phases of this sort of all-inclusive unity experience. And the first is that, and this is a simple practice, in the mystical traditions, it's often called, in Sanskrit, it's called neti, neti. And that literally means not this, not that. And so it's the way you discover your true self. And your true self, if I was to say to you, just make a list of all the things, all the qualities that describe you or define you. And so so you start writing out, my name is such and such, I'm this many years old, I was born in such and such a place, I went to school here, I have this degree, I work in this job, I'm in this relationship. And you just sort of list all these things that you can think about yourself. And then a tradition, something like Zen Buddhism or Vedanta or Christian mysticism, would say, okay, that's fine, but notice you have at least two selves. One is the self that you can see, that can be seen, and that's everything that you just wrote down. But then there's the seer of that. There's the witness of all of that. And you can't see that as an object. If you look within, anything you can see is by definition part of the seen self. You can't see the seer. And so many of the traditions will simply say that the seer itself is a vast emptiness. It's a vast openness. But whatever you do, you can't qualify it. You can't put an adjective on it. Because if you do, you're just making it objective. You're making it part of the seen self. And that's not who you are, not really. And that's why most of the traditions maintain that who we think we are is an illusion. is we've identified with some set of objects, and they're not even a real subject. They're not even a real self that's doing the seeing. They're just something that can be seen. They're all objects. That's not who you are. So everything you wrote down on that sheet of paper, that's who you are not. That's not your real self. Now, as you meditate, and it's you're doing zazen, and you're just sitting in a corner for 4 hours a day and not moving, what's going to happen is all this objective crap is going to come up, and you're going to just see it, and you're going to see it, and you're going to see it. And as you see something, you're disidentifying with it. You realize, whether you know it or not, that's what's happening. You say, "Oh, I see that. Okay, that's an object. That's not the witness. I'm just the witness." And as you just sit there witnessing everything, then sooner or later you just fall into that radical witnessing stance. And that, to the extent that's described at all, is described as a radical freedom, a radical liberation, a genuine nirvana, because you're not identified with any of these manifest finite objects. And all objects do the same thing. They come, they stay a while, they torture you, and they leave. That's all objects do. And you're actually identified with a bunch of those. That's stupid. That's called an illusion. That's the big illusion. And so what these traditions want you to do is find your real self. What's the actual self, capital S? What's the seer of all of this? Not something seen. What's the seer? So the practice on that aspect of the waking up, it's just, I'm not this, I'm not that. Anything you can see is not who you really are. And that can become a very, very profound realization. And it's sometimes described as just pure awareness and not any content of awareness. And that's what it is. It's just this pure consciousness, pure awareness, pure being. But the thing is, because it's not identified with any of these objects out there, then you're free of that. So I see the mountain, I'm not the mountain. I see this computer screen, I'm not this screen. I have sensations, I'm not those sensations. I have feelings, I'm not those feelings. I have thoughts, I'm not those thoughts. I'm the witness of all of that. And the witness is free of all of that. It's free from these sensations, from these feelings, from these thoughts, free from this body, free from this mind. That's a radical freedom. And that radical freedom, the discovery of that part of that radical freedom, is the beginning of what's called enlightenment or awakening or realization. And it's just that. So I'm not this, I'm not that. And you can start to get a sense of the freedom that pure awareness has. And that can be just even getting a little glimmer of just that pure witnessing awareness. It's not any content. Anything you can see is not it. So what's left is this vast, vast openness, this vast clearing in which everything is arising moment to moment. But you're none of what's arising. You're just this vast open, this vast clearing, this radical freedom. So that's a good one to begin waking up. And then a good practice for growing up. Let me give you a quick example. And this is also why growing up wasn't discovered until just so recently. But this is, it's called a two-colored ball experiment. And it's rather famous. It's a version of which Piaget did. But if you take a very young child, say 2 or 3 years old, and you take a ball that's colored differently on both sides. So let's say one side of it is green, one side of it is red. And you put the child here, and then you're here, and then you put the ball between the two of you, and you turn it a lot of times so they can see it's green on this side, it's red on this side, it's green on this side, red on this side. Then you turn, and then you put it so the red side is facing the child, and the green side is facing you. And you ask the child, what color are you seeing? They'll correctly say red. And you say, what color am I seeing? They'll say red. They can't do what psychologists call, they can't take the role of other. They cannot see it through your eyes and realize that you're seeing the world in an entirely different way. But as they get older, and certainly by the time they're 6, 7 years old, if you do that same thing, say, what color are you seeing? They'll say red. Say, what color am I seeing? They'll say green. They get it right. They can actually understand that you're seeing the world through a different perspective. Now, that's actually shifting from early stages of growing up that are often called egocentric into those group-oriented, where you take the role of other, and I'm going to call it ethnocentric, on the way to world-centric. So part of, and you can see that the difficulty right there is that this is often something that just wasn't particularly noticed because, the child's just being a child, and whether they can tell what you're seeing or not is not something they normally ask a child. And certainly no human researchers did until about 100 years ago when they discovered this kind of stuff. But that also turns out to be because each new major stage of growing up adds a capacity for yet another perspective. So you actually end up going from first person perspective to second person perspective to third person to fourth person and so on. And we have empirical evidence going all the way up to around seventh person perspective. And even fifth person, fourth person, fifth person can start to sound like super, super complicated. But if we say something like, do you think that when Mary said that she didn't like Bobby being in love with me, do you remember what she said? Even something like that, it can involve a fourth person perspective. And second tier starts to involve fifth person. And as I said, we have empirical evidence up to seventh person. So one of the ways that you can actually help your own growing up process is, and by the way, growing up refers to your conventional self. It's not your true self. The true self doesn't change. It's a pure witness at whatever stage you're at. And you can have a waking up experience at virtually any stage you're at. You'll interpret it according to your stage of growing up because that's how your mind works. So that's why it's important to include both of those. But it's still one of the reasons that the great paths of liberation, the great meditative, contemplative paths worldwide, one of the reasons they didn't study stages of growing up is that those were stages that just the relative self goes through. And that's correct. But that relative self is learning to take the perspectives of other, for example. And so that ends up being incredibly important, particularly, as I said, because that's actually how you'll end up interpreting any enlightenment or awakening you had. That's why cultures could have waking up and still have slavery. Slavery you got rid of when you reached a world-centric stage of growing up. Didn't have anything to do with waking up. So what you want to simply do to help take these different perspectives of the relative world is just put yourself in the role of other. Actually sort of imagine that you have this two-colored ball between you and whoever you're talking to. And then at some point, actually put yourself in the role of the other person and try to see what they're seeing. Literally take the role of other. And most of us will tend to do that in a fairly subconscious way. But you can do it as an actual exercise, and it really will exercise that muscle in your brain. And that is one of the very best things you can do for growing up. So you want to take the role of other. You want to, I'm not this, I'm not that. And you want to do a 3-2-1 process about, oh, I hate that person for that. Oh, maybe that's me. I'm having trouble with, I'll look into that on the side. One of the things that would just help humanity at large is when, of course, we actually start teaching more overall integral approaches in our schooling system. And I happen to believe that when we do hit about 10% of the population at integral second tier stages, that there will be that tipping point, and we will start to have a major impact on our culture at large. And I think at that point, we can reasonably expect to see more than just 70% of the world's population at ethnocentric or lower. We can start to see more people at orange or green or teal or turquoise second tier, because we'll know it's there. And we will have educated adults that they can continue their education. That when they graduate high school or graduate college, that doesn't mean they stop growing. That's a horrible thing to teach people, but that's basically what we teach people today. And that's a disaster. And it impacts every major world problem that we have. So.
Enter the Future Thinkers giveaway and win our brand new community membership, including in-depth courses, private calls, and more, as well as a supply of Qualia, a complete cognitive upgrade for your brain. To enter the contest, simply go to futurethinkers.org/giveaway and sign up for our mailing list to instantly get our 50-page guide on how to adapt to the future. There are many ways to increase your chances of winning. Enter the competition today. The brand new Future Thinkers members portal is now live. Develop your sovereignty and self-knowledge with our in-depth courses, get access to our weekly sense-making calls, join the Q&As with past podcast guests, and much more. Become a Future Thinkers member today at futurethinkers.org/members. To stay up to date with new episodes, subscribe to Future Thinkers on your favorite platform. And leave us a review or a like. It really helps out the show. And don't forget to share this episode on social media.